Hello everyone. So earlier I uploaded a video that showed how to make this report. It's a material summary that will allow us to filter by the vendor. As you can see in parentheses on each line I have the vendor. I either have none set or I have the vendor that was selected in my material schedule. So when I try to reload this report, it will prompt me for a filter. Right now the only vendors that are being used in this job are either no vendor or the sample vendor. Now this is the default vendor that is set to the material, not the complete list of vendors that we can set to it. So that's what we're going to be setting up today. So when I hit OK, you can see I now only have 2 items because they came from my sample vendor. So let's go through how we made this. So we'll click on Setup Reports and I will go to Material Summary Optimized. That is the report that is the base of this. You can do the same thing for Material Summary. It will have no other impact on it, but we're going through the optimized. So we're going to hit Copy, and I'm going to go to the end and change this to Vendor, just to keep it separate from the one I've already created. So that's here at the bottom. All right, so the first thing we need to do, we have to go to Report Properties. You can see I have 3 tables that have been imported. I need to make a simple change to one of the tables, CX Material. Now I can't actually edit anything here, so what we're going to do instead is we're going to click the Import button, and we're going to move this out of the way so we can go down here and find the Material table, and we're going to click off every single one of these columns and then 2 more, or 1 more. So we need ID, we need name, we need material type ID, we need unit of issue ID, default cost, and the waste. All right, so we've got that, and we need 1 more. We need the default material vendor ID. Now I'm going to change the name of this from CX Material to CX New Material and just hit OK. And you can see the CX New Material here. If I go to CX Material, the only difference is that we now have the default material vendor ID. All right, now I also need to import another table. This, we don't need to move the thing out of the way. We'll just find the material vendor table. We will select the ID, the material ID, and the vendor ID. Now, if you wanted to use the cost here instead of the default cost, we could do that, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to hit OK, and there we go. Now we have this link between our vendors and our materials. Next up, we need to go to import one final table, which is our vendor table. This will contain all of our vendors. We select the ID field, the name field, and any other information that you might need, like account number or contact information or whatever. But for my purposes, all I need is the ID and the name. And I'll hit OK. And we can see it brought in those values. All right. So what do we do from here? We're going to go to our parts table, which contains all of our information, and we want to add the vendor ID and the vendor name. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to go to our SQL tab. We're going to right-click and select all, right-click again, and select copy. Now I'm going to go back to the data preview window. Then I'm going to open up a notepad editor. I use Notepad++. You can use regular Notepad, or you can use WordPad or anything else, whatever works for you. So I'm now going to right-click, select Paste, and that put this all in here. Now we need to change CX Material in all of these instances to CX New Material. The easiest way to do that, there's a couple ways to do it. You can go on your keyboard, you can hit Control and then H, or you can go in Notepad++, you can go to Search and click Replace. You can see there's the shortcut for it. All right, some other editors will be in the Edit menu, so it depends on what you're using. So I'm going to Search and Replace, and you can see I've got it. It's pulled in whatever's selected as find what, And we're going to change this to CX new material. We're going to replace all. And now all of those CX materials have been replaced with CX new materials. So that's what we want there. All right, now we're not done with this. We still need to modify this a little bit. So to do that, we're going to, again, right-click, select all, right-click, and copy. You can also go to Edit and select all and edit and copy, whatever is easiest for you. Now that's put it into my Windows clipboard. I'm now going to open up my SQL editor. I use FlySpeed SQL Query. If you've been watching my videos, you know this is my favorite one. There's plenty of other ones out there. Use whatever you feel comfortable with. So, remind me later on the update. We're going to connect to the report database. If you haven't connected to the report database before, you can go to Connection, New Connection, select MS Access, leave it at MS Access 2000 and newer, browse for your report.mdb, which is in the planet solid _9_0 / database folder. Okay, and it doesn't have a password if you're using Ultimate or anything else. I'm not sure when the password's put on exactly. So we hit next, and then we can give it a name, and then it would throw it in this list right here. I already have it, so I don't want to do that. I'm going to hit cancel. So with the database that we've done there, we're going to hit new query, and we're going to go to the text area. I'm going to right click and select paste. Then we're going to click in the main area, and there we go. Here's the visualization of our SQL query. So from here, we need to modify this to add that vendor information. All right, so how do we do that? Well, each material can have an infinite number of vendors assigned to it. That's why we have that CX material vendor table. Okay, and we're going to go to our default material vendor ID. Now, this is a link between our material and the ID value here. Okay, so I can drag and drop from default material vendor ID to ID. We then have to right click on this and edit it. We have to make sure that it's always going to select all the information from the left table, which is materials. So we just put a check there, and we hit OK. So there are, in other editors, there's different ways to do it. So essentially what we're going to be coming in is with what we call a left join. If we look here in our text, we can see a bunch of this left join information. Our left table being the CX new material. That's why we drag from this way to this way and not the other way around. So now we know what the default material vendor is. How do we get the vendor name? Well, we go over here to CX vendor, pop it in there, and we're going to go from vendor ID to ID. And we're also going to right click on this, edit it, and go select all from left. We're going to hit OK, and there we go. So now I can actually, instead of putting the default vendor ID in here, I can actually put in ID and name. Now, that's going to create duplicate fields, so FlySpeed SQL will have given us an alias here. Well, we're going to create our own aliases. We're going to go vendor ID and vendor name. So now when I execute this SQL, you can see I have all the information that the query should have given me in the first place, and all the way at the very end, I have vendor IDs and vendor name, but there's this weird character. It's not coming up with my material vendors. That should say sample vendor, and it doesn't. So why does it do that? And why are these fields blank? Well, there's not always a default vendor selected. So because of that, we have to create a little bit of logic. So we're going to select CX vendor ID. We're going to go home, and we're going to create a conditional here inside of our SQL. I'm going to say if, I should say, open parentheses, and then we're going to type in is null, open parentheses, go to the end, close parentheses, comma, 0, comma, CX vendor.id, close parentheses. So what we did is we said if the vendor ID is null, so that blank space, which is what that is, then return a value of 0. If it's not null, give me the actual value. So watch what happens when I execute that and we go all the way to the end. You can see it's now either 1 or 0. So let's go back to the query builder, and our names are empty as well. So how do we fix that? And before we fix why when it's empty, let's actually get the name we need. So the CX vendor.name is actually contained in a special memo field. Memos hold about 65,000 characters. I can't think of too many, well, any material vendors that would have 65,000 characters in a name, but I guess it's possible. So what we have to do is we have to trim that down. We're going to make it into a text field instead. So I'm going to, from here, I want to pick the first character up to 255 characters. So that'll give me a full text data field and make it easier for everything to show up. So I'm going to type in left, open parentheses, go to the end of it, comma, 255, close parentheses. Now, if I go to execute, go back to the end, you can see I have my sample vendor, I have the vendor ID, but I still need to fill up these empty spaces with something. And the reason I want to do that is for later on, you'll see exactly why we want that. So we'll go back to our query builder, go back to the vendor name that we made, go home, type IIF for IF, open parentheses, is null, open parentheses, CX vendor.id, close parentheses, comma, single quote, and type in like NA or none or whatever you want here. No, I like none. So I'm going to then hit single quote, comma, and then end, close parentheses. Now what we've done, when we execute, if there was no vendor ID, it gives a vendor name of none or whatever we entered there. If the vendor ID is valid, it's going to throw up sample vendor. Now, why do we want that? Again, we'll get to that in a minute. So this query is awesome. This is what we want. So we're going to go back to our query builder, and we have to format this text here just a little bit to make Cabinet Vision work with it properly. So we're going to go to our first left join line, and if it's not coming out the way it's showing here, that's fine. What you're going to want to do is put everything on one line. So I'm going to go the next line, hit home, backspace, 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 and space, making sure that all of my keywords like left join on, all of that stuff are highlighted in blue so that I know that it's working properly. Otherwise I'll get an error. So again, I'm just going to do that for every line here. All right, now I've got these. This is what you want. You want each clause, select from, group by, and order by. You want them all to be on their separate line, spaced by one line. This will ensure that Cabinet Vision will take your SQL query that you've made and run with it. So, once again, I'm going to right-click and select all, right-click and copy. Now I can go back to Cabinet Vision, and because this ran in FlySpeed SQL, Cabinet Vision's open and all these tables are all there, I know this is going to run in Cabinet Vision. So I'll make sure my parts table is selected, go to SQL, right-click, select all, right-click, and paste. Go to Data Preview, and there we go. We now have all of the information we want, and if we go all the way to the end, bam, sample vendor and vendor ID. So before we go in and edit the report to create our filter, we're going to actually get this list of vendors that are in the job. So we're going to go back to FlySpeed SQL. We're going to create a new query, and I'm just going to right click and paste again since that query that we used was already in our system. So when I go to the query builder, I can now delete all of the information that I don't need, which is CX extra board info, extra size info, and material override in this case. And that leaves me with all of this. So I now can expand out this column here. You see a lot of stuff here that I absolutely don't need. Uncheck, uncheck, uncheck. That's about it there. Then we'll start deleting, delete, delete. All right, as we get near the end, we want to make sure we leave the last two on there, which is the vendor ID and vendor name that we got. We'll execute this, and you'll see all I have are those two items. Okay, so that's exactly what we need. Now, we could also change this up a bit so that we remove the grouping. Okay, that's going to clean this up a bit. And when we execute, now the only problem is we have a bunch of these values. Okay, so we went from having two to having all of these. So we could keep the group by, but again, I want this to clean and easy. So I'm going to go back to my query builder, and I'm going to add a special keyword to my select clause. And that's going to be distinct. Okay, so now I don't have that extra group by. I don't need that anymore because when I hit execute, I now have two again. All right, so you could leave it the way it was before where it grouped it all together, but that is a little excessive, and if we want to come back later and mess around with this, it can be annoying to work with. So the distinct field, or the distinct keyword, gives us exactly what we need. So we are done here. Again, let's do a little bit of cleanup to get it working in Cabinet Vision. You'll notice this one's a lot easier than it was last time. So then right-click, select all, right-click, and copy. Go to Cabinet Vision. We're going to create a new table this time. And it doesn't really matter which one we take here because I'm not going to use the wizard for this. I'm going to go to this. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it Job Vendors. All right. And then I'm going to go to SQL, right-click, select all, right-click, and paste. Go to Data Preview, and there we go. Now I can use this information inside of our report. So let's do that now. Now that all of this is cleared up, I'll hit close, design report, and the first thing I want to do is I want to create that prompt, that thing that says, hey, what's the vendor filter? So I will go to project, report parameter, and this is where we can prompt ourselves with anything we want. I think I made another video on this before. If I did, right now there should be some pop-up coming up saying, hey, this is where you did that. So so we'll create a new one, and we're going to give it a name. I want to give it something a better name than @parameter01. We want to leave the @ symbol there to denote that it is a parameter. So we'll go @ let's say vendor filter. All right. So now the available values, I can define values that I want, but we don't want to because we actually pulled those into the report. Remember when we made that job vendors table? So that's what we want to use. We're going to go from data source, and it's already selected job vendors. I don't know why it always selects the one that I need, but every time I test, it always selects that one. I'm assuming because there's only two fields, an ID field and a string field. If it hasn't, you go here, select the table you want, select the ID field for the field for value. Now the reason we want that is because we're going to be filtering by the vendor ID. So, but we don't want to have to select the vendor ID because what would show up? 0, 1, 150, whatever. That would be confusing. So we're going to go to the displayed value, and we're going to enter in the vendor name here instead of the vendor, instead of leaving it blank. So we'll go job vendors dot vendor name. Okay. So you could also edit the formula to verify that it is what it is. All right. And that's that. That's what we want. We can leave it empty, but I'd rather not. I'd rather force a value to be selected. The reason being is I want it that you have to select either none, which will filter out everything else, or will not filter anything out, or a selected vendor, which will show everything. All right, so We can also come here to a description and add a description to it. I'm going to call this, I'm going to start with an open quote and say vendor filter, so that when it's prompted, it's easier to understand what it is. So I'll hit OK. And if we save it, we can actually see that this does that. We'll go to view mode. And there we go, vendor filter, none or sample vendor. And we will hit OK. Nothing happens right now because we don't have any logic built into that. But let's go ahead and do that now. We'll go to design report. We'll go to our parts table. And we're going to go to our data section here in the properties. And we're going to go to filter. And we're going to make that a formula. So now this formula has to return either true or false. True meaning that the data that's going to be put in is not filtered. False meaning it is filtered, so leave it out. So to do that, we're going to create a condition. I'm going to hit edit and say at vendor filter equals 0, which would mean our none filter. We'll hit OK. So right now, if vendor filter equals 0, what happens if that's true? Well, I want to return true. Okay, so I don't want it to filter anything out. What happens if it's false though? Well, now we need to create a filter. We need to go to edit, and we'll say parts.vendor ID equals at vendor filter. And there we go. So now I know that I have that information right there. I can hit OK. I can then make sure this is all selected and hit insert. When I hit OK, I'll save it and we'll review that. We'll leave it at none and OK, everything shows up. What happens when I view it again though? And select sample vendor. There we go. It filtered out everything there. Now, you'd think we'd be done at this point, but we're actually not. The reason being, the material cost is its own parts table. So we have to go to design report. We'll select our parts table that we worked on already. We'll go to formula, select all, and copy. Then we'll go to this parts table, formula, select all, and paste, and hit OK. Now, our cost will also have the filtering done as well. So that's how I did that. Now, if you want to add the material or the vendor name in, that you can take that and do that right here, right now. You can do whatever you need to do. Hope this was enjoyable and it showed you something that we can do that's really cool with existing reports and coming up with some creative filtering. All right, thank you very much and have a nice day.